This presentation is based primarily on the contents of the Copy Editor's Handbook, the Chapter 6 reading. But know that when you're editing something, you should supplement this information with Editing Canadian English, the 3rd edition. And if you do go on to edit Canadian material, you should also be referring to the CP Style Guide's Caps and Spelling, a really useful guide for those picky bits. There are some general rules to capitalization, but then of course there are all the exceptions and the various reasons for applying a slightly different style and so on. And of course that's where some confusion might lie. Now the textbook talks about two general styles, the down style and the up style. The down style applies fewer capital letters, so capitalize only proper nouns and adjectives. So for example, the president announced rather than the president, capital P, announced. The Notley government, the minister spoke. So Notley is capitalized because Notley is a proper noun and government is not capitalized as part of the down style. Now, generally speaking, the down style might be used for the purpose of book publishing, as well as perhaps a personal blog, that kind of thing. The up style is often used by governments, also for periodicals as well as corporations and other organizations. But there are likely specific rules unique to each institution, so be sure to check. Create your own style sheet or fall back on Editing Canadian English. So for example, the MacEwan University, they have their own style guide, as does the U of A, the University of Alberta. So they might use something like CP style as a general guide, and then have these specific rules that they apply to their documents. And this is really important because you run into very precise usages within an organization. Let's fall back to MacEwan University because it's something you're all familiar with. What courses should be capitalized? What portion of courses should be capitalized? What about various faculties? What about the president and the provost and faculty members? What about particular positions within the organization? All of these decisions need to be made so that there's an element of consistency and thoughtfulness. And that's true for many organizations. So in the case of the up style, if you knew the president you were referring to, then you would capitalize the P in president. The Notley government, of course, there's only one Notley government, so you would capitalize the N for Notley and the G for government. If you knew, again, who the minister was that you were speaking of, you would then capitalize the M in minister. And if you do take a look at Editing Canadian English, there is an entire chapter devoted to capitalization. And they tackle a lot of these issues. They don't set firm rules usually, but they do give you the information that you need to understand what considerations you need to make. So, for example, under political and judicial entities, and I'm referring to Editing Canadian English, page 99 right now. Canadians, like many people around the world, take their law and order seriously and respectfully. The following terms of the Canadian judiciary and political system are usually capitalized when used as a noun or an adjective. So, crown, as in the monarchy, is capitalized. Grit or Tory. Hansard, which is actually the style guide for various political organizations. House of Commons, the House, the Commons. House and Commons are capitalized. Opposition, when it's official, is capitalized. Parliament is capitalized, but parliamentary is not. Red Chamber is capitalized, as is Senate, but not senatorial. Supreme Court of Canada is capitalized, although not prepositions within that title. Federal Court of Canada, all provincial and territorial Supreme Court. So this is the kind of information that you'll find in this guide. Really useful when you're not sure what to do. So let's move on to geographical names. Proper names and nicknames of places are capitalized. So the Great Wall of China, Niagara Falls, and the Rocky Mountains are all capitalized. Now notice that the articles are not, and neither are the prepositions. So just be aware of that. Directional nouns and adjectives are capitalized when they are used to refer to a distinct region. So, for example, we often talk about the West or the West Coast. Those are being used as nouns to denote a specific area. They are not indicating a direction. You might be on the West Coast, so the West Coast would not be west of you. So that is a specific location, not a direction. So when you are indicating a direction, for example, Northern Alberta, Central Europe, west of the billboard, you would then use the lowercase. Now you can see that this might have to do with context. Because Northern Alberta, why is that different from West Coast? Well, it's going to depend on how established a term is. So in some cases, Northern Alberta might actually be capitalized, and same with Central Europe. A lot of this comes down to what is the accepted practice and how has that been established. Acronyms. So when you're dealing with acronyms on the first iteration, spell out the full name of the organization or the company or the term and place the acronym in parentheses right afterwards. After that, you may simply use the acronym. Now, sometimes when you're editing an entire document, you might need to make exceptions to this. For example, when I was writing Weaving a Malawi Sunrise, there were tons of acronyms, so many acronyms. As soon as you start talking about international policy, wow, do you ever run into a lot of acronyms. I actually ended up putting a glossary of acronyms in that book. And when I was writing it, I made a number of considerations, and eventually I went back and revised some of my choices. So at times there were acronyms that were so widely accepted that they didn't need introduction. And then at other times there were obscure acronyms that weren't used very often in the text. So I would follow a rule with the more obscure acronyms that I would spell out the entire term the first time in a chapter. So instead of just spelling it out once in the document and then having it stand for the rest of the document in using the acronym, I would spell it out at the beginning of each chapter that it was used. Because if a term is mentioned in chapter 1 and you've written it out and then it's not used again until chapter 10, well, you can see that that might be confusing to the reader. And sure, they've got the glossary to look it up in, but we want to make the reading experience as seamless as possible for the reader. That is basically our job as the editor. So in times when I have had editorial control, I have, made those kinds of calls myself. And I didn't have ultimate editorial control with Weaving Malawi Sunrise, but I did have input. And I thought it was important to think about those kinds of things. So be aware of that as the editor. What makes the most sense for the document that you're editing, whatever that document is, whether it's a report or whether it's a manuscript of some sort or whether it's a collection of some sort. So just watch for that and be aware that, sometimes uh, an acronym can be really widely known, like the US. And it would be kind of silly to spell out the US and then put the acronym in parentheses. You probably wouldn't do that as an editor. That would be just redundant and foolish. But I have another example from Weaving a Malawi Sunrise. It occurred to me that I was really familiar with the term NGO, um, but that perhaps some people in my audience um, might not be particularly uh, familiar with the term NGO, so non governmental organization. Um, it seemed it seemed self-evident to me because I'd been working with that type of information for a long time, but that doesn't mean that it would be self-evident to everyone. Company names, trademarks, and brand names, always double check. So go to the source. I don't know many organizations that don't have an official website. Often there are non-standard uses of things like hyphenation or capitalization. Sometimes there's use of the ampersand. There might be odd spelling or spacing, or say a lack of an apostrophe, for example. So just be aware of that.